Hello and welcome to the Crypto Club and Digital Assets weekly catch-up on Zoom. It is Sunday, the 29th September 2024, and as is always the case, we never know quite what we're going to be talking about. Topics we've covered in previous sessions include Bitcoin, Ethereum, price movements, Layer 1 and Layer 2 blockchains, DeFi, NFTs, ICOs, and any other three-letter acronyms, the metaverse, central bank digital currencies, general economic news and market news, lots more. The conversation really gets decided by whoever comes along. So if you'd like to join us for a future session, we hold these every Sunday evening, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. UK time. Everyone's welcome. Details on how to come along to a future event are in the link below. Meanwhile, do remember to subscribe, to like, to make comments on the video, but more importantly, come along to a future session. Anyway, with that, let's see who's going to come and join us today. Sean, hello.
Hey Gary, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good of you to join us.
Likewise for setting it up and hosting.
Hey, a pleasure. Have you been on any of our sessions before, Sean?
I'm not. So I've been working in digital assets in Asia for the last couple of years. I've just moved back to the UK. So part of my networking and seeing the scene up here, just kind of joining, seeing where everyone's about. So my
Okay,
general interest.
excellent. Well, welcome aboard. We never quite know how these sessions are going to run. So some weeks we end up with 8 to 10 people joining with a wide range of views and geographies, including Asia and Middle East and quite often West Coast USA. Other
Right.
weeks it's just a couple of us, which
Yeah.
which sometimes actually turn out to be the more interesting ones because you can do like a deep dive in whatever area. So you're saying you're working in Asia? That was what, Singapore or somewhere then?
So yeah, so it was a year in Singapore. I don't know if you know Kaiko, the digital assets market data. Give me 1 second. Market data people. So
Hmm.
I was working for them for about 2.5 years, and I've just left them. And I'm about to start with a crypto prime broker. Isn't public yet, so I won't mention who, but I'm starting
Okay.
in a couple of weeks' time. A year in Singapore, and then I moved back because I was originally in Hong Kong. I moved back to Hong Kong when the law changed March of last year. So last year and a half in Hong Kong, but we pitch everywhere. We pitch the whole region, India, Australia, Japan, Korea, just everywhere.
Okay.
So yeah, it's been super fun time.
That's fascinating. Just been joined by, it says G on the screen, so I'm guessing that's Gabriella in Spain.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, there we go. I was right. Gabriella, good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome back. We were just saying, Sean was saying he was in Asia until recently in the crypto space. I was going to ask you a couple of questions about that, then, Sean, in terms of the
Go ahead.
your experiences in Hong Kong and Singapore. What's the kind of similarities and differences do you think crypto wise?
Um, so Hong Kong until March of last year, crypto was verboten, and so almost nothing was going on. All of the crypto firms that were based there either left and went to Singapore, or some of them went to Dubai, or others went not underground, but they kind of closed the shop. So if you were doing market making, quote unquote, on Telegram, you could still live in Hong Kong. You could do it as long as you didn't touch Hong Kong investors or solicit in Hong Kong. So it was some
Mhm.
people like that were going on there. The backroom trade in capital flight from China's it's gone on forever, always gone on. Went on before crypto, was always going to go on. So that was the case until March of last year, and then as soon as March hit, the government policy completely 180. Everything went full on. Everyone's come back. Government is super friendly. So when we moved up there, Kaiko, I went to see they're called Invest Hong Kong, like foreign direct investment people. You could not meet a more helpful market-oriented bunch of government people. It was astonishing. You know what I mean? Like you go to the government in the UK and you go, "Can I have some money or some help?" And they go, "No, here's a pamphlet." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really. But so we kind of interviewed with them because they want to make sure we're not Sam Bankman-Fried types. But once you get your tick of approval, we get recommended. They promote stuff for us, invite us to conferences. Really super helpful. So that's Hong Kong, and has been just going crazy. The regulation there is very good, well written, but
Hmm.
just too strict. So the
Yeah.
actual framework itself is great, but just the rules like you can't list more than effectively 2 coins for retail in Hong Kong. It's just too strict. But anyway, there's a bigger long-term plan. Singapore has kind of gone the other way. It was just open market for everything. You could do whatever you liked, as much as you liked until FTX. And then when FTX happened, simplistically, you're not allowed to do anything onshore. You can do anything offshore. So if you have a prime broker or an exchange in Singapore and your clients on your solicitation or selling is outside of Singapore, you can do whatever you like, as long as you're not wonky stuff. But nothing in Singapore. No solicitation, no advertisement, no taking money. They've clearly kind of drawing the line and saying anyone Singaporean does not touch this stuff. Of course, they're promoting tokenized securities and they're promoting payment rails, but within the construct of the Singapore government's scheme for payment rails, anything crypto versus digital assets and blockchain is completely verboten. So they're simplistic. I can summarize Singapore's policy, which is yes to tokenization of traditional assets, yes to payments and international remittances, no to crypto. Those three: RWA, payments, yes; crypto, no. And that's kind of like Japan is. Japan's a bit like that. They're like, yeah, come have an exchange, do whatever you like. They let you advertise to retail, but they absolutely forbid financial services firms from being active in digital.
Okay.
So there was the. Go ahead.
No, I was quickly going to make a comment. I find it fascinating because if you look at how regulation was evolving worldwide. But first of all, traditional financial regulation. So in the UK, we've got the FCA, in Hong Kong, HKMA, Monetary Authority of Singapore, and is it JFMA, I think, for Japanese financial...
JFSA.
JFSA. They were all kind of on a par with each other. And I think at times, the UK was seen as being the leader and then Hong Kong and Singapore close behind. And then, as you say, something has changed in the crypto space. There's been like a balkanization of attitudes of either full on, like we're seeing in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the Middle East region, full on support for the whole space, or outright condemnation's a strong word, but an absence of support, shall we say, in some countries. So I was just fascinated to understand, the Hong Kong perspective versus the Singapore perspective, because previously they were quite similar. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, Hong Kong's super interesting as much that there's this weird misperception. They're not anti-crypto. They're anti-crypto without with anonymity, and so they're very much blockchain leader, and they're investing huge amounts in blockchain technology because they broadly regret not supporting mining before. They regret not being involved in Web 2. They regret things like being a leader in solar, and you can see with solar what they try to do is to cover that. So they absolutely want to be dominant in blockchain-based technologies. And I give this statistic, which I find just stunning, which people kind of have missed, which is the Chinese government a year ago, mainland this is. So this is where crypto is forbidden. But a year ago, they started a retraining scheme. It was available to any developer. So you're a JavaScript developer or a network engineer or something like that. You could apply for a grant for a year training course to retrain in blockchain coding technology. It was offered to, this is the interesting part, 300,000 people.
Wow.
It's got a grant for 300,000 people to retrain. Do you see the scale of what they're trying to do? Like in the UK, you get like money for a bus pass to get to night school. Do you know what I mean? It's just the scale that
it's an order of magnitude difference, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a full grant. It was a full, you can go back into education, we'll pay for the whole lot and just retrain in blockchain technology. So, and for them, it's about the broader set of use cases, inventory management, copy management, identity management, healthcare or health records, insurance records, all that stuff that neatly fits on a blockchain distributed ledger. Okay. They want to be a leader in. So yeah, it's kind of super interesting. And one of my questions for moving up here, I came in May and had a look around, was to see what the flavor of the regulation is. I met the Bank of England people, a few people in, because they had trips to Asia, and Kaiko's quite connected with regulators. So I went to the Financial Stability Board meeting in Hong Kong with the banking regulators, stuff like that. but I wanted to kind of see what the vibe was from the FCA compared to the other countries, and then also what the industry, what the market was like. Is it more degen? Is it more not legitimate crypto, but the kind of the ones that want to get payment licenses and custody licenses and this kind of stuff, or is it more Fidelity, BlackRock, traditional finance types, or maybe it's Forge, maybe it's SocGen's Forge, kind of thing, whatever. So that's one of my jobs was to research and figure out what's going on here.
Okay.
So anyone got an opinion about this part of the world and Europe as well, I'd be super interested.
Well, we've got a few people here who sometimes join us or who are with us. So Ken, who's joined us, something of an Ethereum-based advocate, I think, around blockchains. So he may be able to offer an opinion on that. Been joined by Josh as well. Josh, have you been on one of these calls before? And hello, by the way, Josh. Nope, for the first time. It's okay. Come off. You can speak. You're more than welcome to join in directly if you've got audio. Because it's always a little bit more difficult when you're chatting via the chat bot. Now, I'm guessing from that Josh is in listening mode. Okay. We'll let you go and reload if you need to, Josh. That's not a problem. Meanwhile, Ken, sorry, we were just chatting about regulatory attitudes, really, around crypto and blockchain. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, experience that you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to the UK, it's a lot of talk. The government says they support it, but it's hard to see how they have been supporting. It's really hard to quantify it. So that's my thing. But I think a lot of it is, the US, they're still working through their regulation. But yeah, I think Asia is leading in terms of a lot of developers are moving away into Asia and into sort of some of the offshore countries like Dubai, simply because they just get more support.
So, Gabriella, I think we were talking about this last week, weren't we? You were asking a question about regulation. Oh, sorry, no, it wasn't you asking about regulation. It's someone else on the call, but I don't know, with you being back in Spain, is it any different in mainland Europe now?
Not really, because I've been more on the US market.
Okay.
So is what I'm follow up. And nowadays with elections as well. So let's say what happened. Yes, because Trump right now is on the side of the Bitcoiners, So let's say what happened there with the regulations. And
that's a really good point. The US elections could have quite an impact on
exactly.
Regulatory appetite and who is in charge of the regulators as well. So I suspect at the end of November, there might be a few changes going on with some of the leaders. Sean, my perspective is that I'm seeing a number of things. One is that government spokespeople are being very pro-crypto because they're all saying, crypto and blockchain, yeah, it's the future, great opportunity. We can be a world leader. We can build on our existing reputation of being a well-regulated financial institutional-based country and so on. That's what the government's saying. However, what's actually happening tends to be anything but that. The number of times I've experienced with people who've tried to do basic things like set up a crypto business with a bank account in the UK, and you just can't do it. It's really, really nightmarish. As soon as you mention the word crypto for a bank account, you will not generally get a UK one. And they'll cite all sorts of reasons and challenges. And it's funny, we're having a chat about some of this stuff the other day on one of the, I think it was on a WhatsApp group, where we're talking about the UK is a little bit weird because crypto is not a financial regulated instrument. However, the UK FCA is the designated supervisor of crypto for purposes of anti-money laundering and CTF and all sorts of three-letter acronyms and that. And so as a result, we've got a weird thing for crypto companies in the UK So anyone who advertises crypto or crypto services or anything like that has to be registered with the UK FCA. But that doesn't mean that they're regulated by them. So you've got this subtle distinction that you have to be on the register, but that doesn't mean you're regulated. And so you got this kind of thing. And then last year, the UK government introduced, each year it does what's called the Financial Services Act. So it's an annual act that they update, which gives all the latest requirements and that for financial services. And one of the pieces in last year's piece of legislation was to extend effectively the scope of the FCA to not just do what a traditional regulator does, which ultimately is about systemic stability and protecting people's money, that kind of thing. That they extended it to include the requirement for the FCA to be, I can't remember the exact phrase now, but it's on the lines of regulatorily competitive in the international market. So what the government was effectively saying was keep up the good work, keep up the reputation, but have a little think about how you're treating financial regulation, because we want you to make the UK attractive to overseas markets and that kind of thing. And that's where crypto's still falling in that gap kind of thing. So there are various things coming through. Lord Holmes in the House of Lords, he pushed for a piece of legislation which affects blockchain very closely. The name of the actual act I can't recall now, but it was basically about digital services and digital registration and digital documentation. And I'll try and dig out what it was before, but effectively it was kind of like a blockchain charter in a way of supporting and encouraging the use of digital recording of assets. So you think about, in shipping, bills of lading, trade finance, all these things that can go digital. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag in the UK. And my perspective is that the lip service is that it's been very supportive, but the practicality is that that's not being reflected. I don't know, Josh, have you got some audio now? I saw you come on video for a moment. Are you able to speak now?
Yes. Hello. Hi.
I don't know, Josh, your background, where you're from, where your interest is.
Yeah. So I've lived in Cambridge for about 9 years, and I'm originally from Utah in the U.S. I don't know whether you know Ayla, who contributes on the WhatsApp group quite a bit. I've known her since moving here. She was part of my department originally. In terms of crypto and things like that, I've paid attention to Bitcoin for quite a long time, and mostly I'm a Bitcoiner, but I pay attention to the other things a bit. So.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining. But funny, I was in Cambridge a few weeks ago, so probably passed you by or something. It's a small
fair
world.
enough.
Yeah, cool.
No, first time joining and just seeing what's going on. This is weekly, right? At 7? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. We hold it every week, and as you can see, we get a variety of people. So we've got Elena's joined us. Elena is one of our great stalwarts who's becoming, I would say, an emerging expert in the world of the metaverse. And she's also an expert at asking really good, really basic questions that make you go, I hadn't really thought about that. So she's a superstar on that. Has been coming for a while. Gabriella, who's listening in at the moment, back in Spain now, takes an interest, I think, in Web3 is your main area of interest, isn't it, Gabriella? All right.
Yes, and Bitcoin.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and then Ken is I'm describing as a blockchain maxi. That he's really into blockchains, and I think he and I are aligned with the concept of layer 1 rather than layer 2 solutions and that kind of thing. And he knows quite a bit about Ethereum as well, I think. So is that a fair thing to say, Ken?
Yeah, that's probably right.
Probably an understatement. So it's a small world, small community, but
Yeah.
we welcome everyone joining in. But I guess kind of coming back to Sean's perspective, hopefully that gives a little bit of thinking around where we're at regulatory wise with the whole space. I mean, it's interesting that HKMA, so Hong Kong Monetary Authorities, you'll know, they launched a stable coin sandbox, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Right, I know a couple of the people that are putting their coins up.
Okay. So that puts them kind of like ahead of the market. If you compare it to in the UK, as you mentioned, the Bank of England, who are still doing their research on what became known at one point as Britcoin, which was a potential CBDC solution. And they seem to be, I think they're about halfway through that project right now, where they're talking about it. But the fundamental questions with that seems to be people in Parliament saying, what problem is it actually solving? And that's where people are going, well, it allows us to improve transparency. It's like, and do we need that? It's like, well, if you're a government that wants to watch what people are spending, then yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know that debate, and I forget the Bank of England chap who's heading up that group. He was a keynote speaker at a dinner I attended. But anyway, at some other event, I sat down at the table. This was the Financial Stability Board meeting. We had dinner attached to it, and so I sit down at the table, and there's a bunch of people on there, and there's a spare seat next to me, and plops down the Hong Kong Monetary Authority bod, who's the head of the digital division, who's doing the analysis about the Hong Kong CBDC. Right, so he's the guy in charge of the department. He's kind of techie, super nice guy called Michael Lawrence, and so Michael Law, and so my Christmases have all come at once. So I kind of go, oh wow, I act all innocent, right? I go. So Michael, how's it going with that assessment of the CBDC? And so he goes, yeah. He says, sorry, are you going to do it? I go, you're going to release a CBDC as opposed to a stable coin. You see, there's the kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So he goes, yeah, no, we're not going to do a CBDC in Hong Kong. He says, we've analysed it all. And he said, there's no real benefit over our current, it's called FPS, fast payment system.
Mm-hmm.
He said, there's no difference in speed. There's no difference in, certainty of not settlement, but certainty of finalisation of the blockchain versus the money moving. FPS is real time.
Finality. Yep.
Finality, yeah. And FPS, you can send a second later. It turns up in the person's bank account. So it's got all of the attributes that compare the two. He said there's no particular reason to do it. He said it's not that we're not for blockchain and stablecoin and whatever. He says, but just the CBDC part. He says there's no point to it. So I go, okay, well that's super interesting. Thanks very much. I said, but if you were to do it, so let's say, supposing you made the decision to do it. I said, who would run the network? I go, would it be the banks? Would it be some form of kind of permissioned group of insiders, whatever? Would it be fully depermissioned? So he goes, we would run the network. And I go, don't be stupid. I say it more politely than that. I go, don't be stupid. It's like, you're gonna be on the hook for the infrastructure for the whole of the market. And he goes, yeah, that's what we already are. The FPS system, banks and everyone we run the whole thing. I say, you pay for the whole, all the bare metal, all the network infrastructure, everything. Goes, yeah, we pay for the whole thing. So if we did a CBDC, we would pay for it all. And I was about to say to him, wouldn't that kind of defeat the object of having a blockchain?
Yep.
But I didn't. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, I know when to keep my mouth shut and when not. But this was the point. It's like, right, really, CBDC, where you're the only network operator. There's only one node. I mean, it's more. It would be more than that. But just one node. What's the point of that then?
Anyway. I mean, there are arguments for CBDCs. I mean, I don't actually know what they are. That they must be making. I mean, I agree with you. Like, it's pointless to have a blockchain when it's already doing the same thing with the fast payment systems.
Yeah.
Well, I think
go.
I was going to offer I know from some of the early conversations that listening to what the Bank of England was saying, that they were being quite pragmatic originally, that they were saying that if they developed a CBDC, it would not be blockchain based, However,
Okay.
it might utilize features that you would see in a blockchain. So you think about, some of the
Okay.
basic premises. So, securing things digitally through cryptography, for example, which is what a
Yeah.
blockchain enables, absolutely makes sense. And it was really interesting because I actually went to a talk by the Bank of England where they were discussing various things, and they started talking about programmability. And programmability of money or of funds becomes very interesting. And it then goes from interesting in a polite way to interesting in a very worrying way. And I actually raised it, I think that evening in a parliamentary meeting to say at an all-party parliamentary group session, what is the thinking about programmable money? Because you suddenly go, and this is where the light bulb moment goes on.
Yeah.
That programmable banking is fantastic. It offers all sorts of capabilities, interoperability. Take Swift for your payments onto a different level. But programmable money, where someone somewhere can control who can spend it, suddenly becomes quite dystopian.
Yeah.
And the politics around that, a lot of people don't realise this was actually tried in the UK a number of years ago. I think it was back in 2016. There was actually a project tried where they rolled out a department of, I've forgotten which department it was now, but basically it was for kind of like unemployment benefits. And they rolled out effectively a token that unemployed people could use to spend on accommodation, food, this kind of thing. And it was kind of ahead of its time, really. So this is, 8 years ago. And the thinking was, well, this would allow you to give funds to unemployed people where they'd only be allowed to use them to buy necessities, so pay for accommodation, food, and that kind of. And this is where it was fascinating because I was giving a talk to a law firm the day that this kind of got announced in Parliament, and it was fascinating because all of the kind of like the conservative people were saying, "Oh, that's brilliant. That means we can control things that you can stop them spending money on drink, drugs, whatever. That's really, really good." And at the time, all the more libertarian and Labour people said, "That's horrific. That means you're suddenly stopping people making their own choices." So in some ways, I think we're going to go through a revisit of that, about the whole trade-off. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, it is there are capabilities that depends where you sit as to whether they're good or not. Sorry, Sean, were you about to say that?
Yeah, no, and I find this a super interesting debate because Modi in India, the big driver or the big rationale for doing it in India that way is that systemic fraud and stop people getting ripped off. The poor people getting ripped off. And there's kind of there's that debate which says, is a programmable payment any different from handouts of the actual goods themselves? For example, so it's kind of interesting, multifaceted debate. But I agree with you from the point of view of typically right wing people stand up and go, yes, of course. Well, they shouldn't be spending it on frivolous things like cigarettes when they should be investing in equities. And it's like, really, dude, really, what the guy on the street's going to take his pound or whatever it is, and he's going to go and buy some shares at his local broker. This is the Jacob Rees-Mogg bullshit of, can't people just go and get a loan to tide them over COVID? It's like, no, mate, you're totally out of touch. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It's fascinating as well. You mentioned India. I was actually out in India a few years ago, and I was at a blockchain conference. In fact, I was extolling the virtues of how you could use blockchains in supply chain and insurance and financial services and that. And it was fascinating because after the event, one of the finance ministers from the government actually came up to me and he said, "Oh, this sounds really interesting." He said, well, we have a problem in India that we have three economies, in effect. And it's like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." He said, "Yeah, we've got the open economy, we've got the black market economy, and we've got the grey economy. And so, well, that's really interesting to know. And he said, so do you think blockchain, if we've got the traceability and everything, would that get rid of the grey economy? And I said, no. He said, oh. I said, all it would do was move it. Because invariably, if you've got people who are looking at ways of getting around systems, if you introduce systematic ways of stopping them doing things, they'll just find new ways. So interesting. Hey, we're joined by Arnold. Welcome back, Arnold. You going to stick around today?
Just pop it in for a second, see what's happening.
Hey, cool. We've been having an interesting conversation about regulation around the world for blockchain and crypto, and the various regulators' appetites and thinking and that kind of thing. We're discussing the nuances between the FCA, HKMA, MAS, JSMA. Trying to think who else we mentioned. There's probably a few others. And Dubai and Middle East in general.
ADGM.
We briefly mentioned, I did mention Abu Dhabi because I think the Gulf states are definitely ahead of the game.
Yep.
And I think ADGM is probably, I suspect, the leader in the Gulf states now in terms of their attitude. What's your thinking, Arnold?
I was with them. I was at COP last December, and they are very keen. They have an alliance or some sort of deal with the Solana Foundation. They're very switched on. So
I think the other thing as well, it's been interesting. We're chatting about blockchains and payments and that kind of thing before as well. And there was a big project a couple of years ago which involved, I think it was Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and I can't remember which other states, which was called Project Adha. And that was all about inter-country settlement schemes. So, but basically, banks between countries doing settlements and using blockchain based on it. So there's definitely a lot of stuff going on there. And Sean, I guess it comes back to the thing about what you were saying about Hong Kong potentially running the infrastructure for their blockchain. Well, I guess the other alternative is someone like Swift provides the infrastructure. And that's another interesting idea.
I had a little to do with the central bankers, the FSB meeting about that. So we were talking about, they asked me, Kaiko is a data company, right? We do a whole bunch of research and some kind of good, objective, not opinion-based stuff. So at the end of our session, it was a Q&A session, basically, all the regulators, and it was over 2 days. We were in 1 hour, so there's lots and lots of other people, not just me. But so to give you context, at the end of our session was Q&A, and questions were coming to me, and they were basically saying, why do people want to use Tether, and why wouldn't they use Circle, and why wouldn't they use a CBDC? And so, I was saying, because people want the utility, but without the heavy hand of government. They got quite difficult about it. They got quite,
sensitive.
How can I say? Yeah. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? So, Circle is regulated and approved and and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, so the conversation moved on to Swift. So they go, what about Swift? And what about Forge with the, whatever it's called, the Euro dinghy, whatever it's called, and then JP Morgan's Onyx and these kind of things. And I go, the Swift, that's just a restack. That's just a back-end optimization play. It's got nothing to do with us. None of that value proposition is coming to any of the users. It's totally going into Swift's pocket, and they're totally trying to sew up the market in the way that they have done for payments for many, many years. I kind of stepped out over my skis, so it were. I was being quite polite. I've been around banking a long time, so I know how to present myself, but I'd certainly got up by my skis. And they were really a little bit kind of taken aback by, no, Swift is trying to solve the problem. I'm like, no, they're trying to keep the whole game sewn up in their own best interest.
I guess it's interesting when you question certain things. I remember being at dinner with a former Bank of England person who was being completely dismissive of cryptocurrencies because they weren't based on any physical underlying asset. And I was saying, well, of all people, you should know that most fiat currencies are also not based on any fundamental underlying assets. He said, oh, yeah, but currency is based on the fundamental security and safety of the country that it's associated with. I said, oh, right, okay, so Zimbabwe, Argentina, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no. I don't mean all countries, certain countries, of course. Oh, okay. So what you're now saying is that we can trust currencies by some governments and countries, but not all. I said, and what's the normal life of a fiat currency? And he said, oh, well, what do you mean? I said, well, how long typically does a fiat currency last? Having researched it previously, it turns out it's about 37 years. And the UK pound, to give it credit, and the US dollar, although I'm not so sure about the US dollar because of its origins, the UK pound, I think it's been around for about 130 years or something. So it's definitely one of the longer lasting.
Well, didn't the pound change? Because when you speak to the older guys, they talk about pennies and farthings and
yeah.
Decimalisation.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and also its principle changed when it was delinked from the gold standard as well. So there's that fundamental change that even though you call it British pounds, it used to be known as pound sterling because I think originally it was connected to silver.
And the dollar as well, because that's why you have the greenback, which was the one backed by the gold, and then now we have just the dollar, which is backed by the military, I suppose.
Yeah. That's ultimately it. That you've got currency that's backed by people who've either got laws or police or military to support it. So it's an interesting perspective. Sean, I think this is a topic that is fascinating about the whole regulatory perspective, and it's nice as well. We kind of started drifting into CBDCs and stablecoins, and this is where I'm seeing the whole crypto space is kind of metamorphosizing into reflecting the traditional financial world. So we're seeing increasing regulation to make crypto kind of better align with fiat type things. So the whole money laundering, CTF, all this kind of thing. The rules are kind of coming in with that. So I find it quite sad in a way, because I think crypto offered so many potential opportunities to do things radically different. And all we seem to be now doing is making it more and more fiat aligned in its behavior and that. I don't know, anyone else got any thoughts on that? Is that just me?
Well, I mean, my thoughts slightly different, but I come from a kind of my point of view. I don't know what, you guys can probably tell me what your point of view is. I think governments should bring in CBDCs, because I think bringing that in is going to onboard people. And then once they know how to use crypto, then they can move on to things like peak and, just truly decentralized protocols will be able. But the biggest problem at the moment is onboarding, and there's no better person to onboard people than the government.
So again, I'm with you, man. So I was at this stability board meeting, and they asked me, and they go, I was in that part of that conversation I talked about earlier on, and they go, simply, I paraphrase, they go, isn't this, you and all the other crypto monkeys and fraudsters? So I lean back across the table and they go, hey, maybe you want to look at outcomes. I said, maybe you want to look at inviting people into the ecosystem as opposed to pushing them out and stopping them get bank accounts. Because if you invited more legitimate players, people with integrity and people who've been doing this stuff in some form, that would actually know what they were doing, maybe you would have a better outcome. It's kind of a little bit of a, testy moment. But I'm with you. I'm like, man, why don't they make the world better and easier rather than just shoving it off into a corner? To go back to Gary's point about regulatory arbitrage around the world, they keep shoving it off to some distant shore, and then the game starts again, right? As opposed to saying to people, hey, why don't you do it properly? Here's a guidance.
Sean, do you get invited to fewer dinners now as a result?
No, I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating for comedic effect. I know my job. I was very diplomatic and polite in this. It was the points were made without being offensive, and we got on quite well at the dinner. afterwards. But
carry on chatting. I just need to sort out my power for a minute. So please do carry on.
so yeah, so I agree, Ken. I think it's one of the answers. I'm generally a believer in distributed ledgers for purposes of not having control. There's got to be a little bit of control, but there's no need. There's no need to have control over 99.99% financial activity that goes on around the world. Is all legitimate and perfectly fine. And that can be done with blockchain, with anonymity, with distributed ledgers, with multiple people running nodes freely, without encumbrance and all that kind of stuff. So
I think I'd quickly offer that there is one good reason I can think of for a centrally controlled CBDC. And I found this really interesting. And I'll give credit to Michael Manelli in the UK who came up with it. So I think he's now the current Lord Mayor of London. But he was giving a presentation to a government committee about cryptocurrencies and blockchains and all this kind of thing. And he made a really interesting observation that if you had total control over the money flows like a CBDC would allow you, the one thing it would offer you is visibility of money velocity, as in you could see how fast money's moving around. And from an economics perspective, and he was thinking about, I think from an academic economic principle, the very fact it means you've got through there an ability to analyze real time the state of your economy and the money supply and the money flow is quite fascinating. The trade-off being whether you want them to do other things with it as well.
I mean, there's a use case for having a digital ledger, whether it's a CBDC or a bank supported in a kind of network, which is only for the purposes of banks doing business with each other. Huge inefficiency in the banks. I say this figuratively. I'm a 30-year banker, by the way. Is like 95% of what they do is utterly pointless, pushing paper around. You could kind of get rid of a big chunk of that with distribute. It wouldn't be a stable coin, wouldn't be a CBDC, would be cryptocurrency, but it would just be using the technology to move value around the internet in a way that we've never done before. We move information around, we never move value, right? We all know this is the paraphrase. So I don't think that's such an illegitimate thing. And then from that, you might like to piggyback on it. You might like to say, well, yeah, I buy my car, and so I'm just going to put it on the blockchain that the banks use. Do you see what I mean? I could kind of see that, but the idea about having a thing which you are beholden to and for which you have no ability to be anonymous if you wanted to be anonymous. You know what I mean? That's the bit I'm not entirely sure about.
I'm not sure about the UK one, but I know somebody was saying that the European CBDC that they're looking to trial, they're not going to include any ability to program it because they think that's just a step too far.
I think they're exploring various options. So if I remember correctly, it's BIS is the organization behind that. And I think that they're exploring options. So I think the Bank of England, for example, at one point made the comment that we're exploring but not certain about programmability. So they're leaving it open, I think is the thing. And BIS has done, I think it's 29 different experiments or projects now around blockchain, crypto, CBDCs, and various other things. They've been doing a lot of really interesting things, and they've published a lot of stuff around their thing as well. So I think they may have said, oh yeah, we probably wouldn't do programmability, but that's only a possible we wouldn't do it, not we won't. So in fact, I was just trying to see if I could find the BIS page on what they've been doing.
I got a bunch of those I got to read.
Yeah,
I've got to slog my way through Mika, all of those BIS papers, and anything written by the FCA. My role is the crypto broker I'm joining is Asia based, and so they want to expand into Europe. And of course, my experience is Asia as well. So I got to slog through all of this stuff for the next couple of weeks.
Okay. See, look, look at this. I mean, they're doing some really interesting basic things. So you've got one around CBDCs and foundational principles, and that's great. And then linking of generative AI. Then you start getting things like the financial stability implications of multifunction crypto asset intermediaries executive summary. It's like, what? That's going to be really good bedtime reading, isn't it? That's going to be keeping you well occupied.
I think I've read, that's one of the ones I've read, and many of their papers are, I think they're quite good, right? And it's useful reading to understand where they kind of go for it, because they're relative leader, even though they're not a central bank or anything like that. But the problem is, you read it and it's written from the perspective of the banking community. So you know what I mean? They fundamentally come at it with the idea that there are intermediaries and there is control of capital and all of these kinds, and there is no anonymity and all these kind of things. So you read it and you kind of go, "Do you seriously, you're going to write this shit? Excuse my language. You're going to write this nonsense." Some of the bits, but anyway,
Yeah.
it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right?
And I think, in fairness as well, you mentioned the FCA. They've been writing some interesting papers and consultations and that kind of thing. But again, it's interesting. I think one of the consultations around a while ago was around crypto derivatives. And the reason I say it was interesting was because they actually went out to the market, they did public consultation, and I think 97 or 98% of all the respondents said that crypto derivatives should be allowed in the UK for consumers. So, it was very, very positive feedback from the people who responded, part of whom were from the industry, part of the public, were saying, yeah, crypto derivatives, it's good. So what did the FCA do? Banned them.
I know, but therein is the oddity, because figuratively, 95% of crypto derivatives have got nothing to do with crypto. They're just TradFi, right?
Yep.
So from that perspective, we already have a framework. We already have regulation. No difference, right? A Bitcoin option on Binance is no different from a Bitcoin option on future on CME.
Yep.
So from that point of view, I agree. All of that lot should be totally available in not to retail man on the street, but to any person who is capable and experienced enough to do those, which is different from the 5%, which is the on-chain or DEX DeFi based derivatives, which is a different animal, kinda. Even though the maths is the same, the articulation of it is different. So those, I'm not sure or such a wise idea to open that up, because that's more about pump and dump scams and not really knowing what you're doing on chain. But
so that probably ties in quite nicely with the lot of conversations that are going on in the States at the moment around Bitcoin ETFs and about Coinbase and BlackRock. and it turns out it's fascinating. If you take a look at who 3 of the biggest holders of Bitcoin are now, it is the hedge funds. It's BlackRock, Grayscale, and
Fidelity and a couple of others.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so it's fascinating that the FCA's position around ETFs is that they still don't think that crypto ETFs are suited for UK consumers. Meanwhile, in the USA, they're going, yeah, they're great and they're growing, because it allows the consumer to get exposure to the crypto world whilst, exactly as you say, remaining protected by existing regulation. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, there was a kind of interesting thing that happened in Hong Kong with the 3 ETFs that were listed there, was that the majority of the subscription was from local Hong Kong Chinese or mainlanders who held the Bitcoin, physical, but not physical Bitcoin, held the Bitcoin, and preferred to have the exposure articulated as a security, because then it gets you, your accountant knows what it is, your lawyer knows what it is, your taxman knows what it is, your middle office and your reporting and all the stuff, because it's just a security. And so the subscriptions there were just conversions of their existing positions into the ETF. So I think there's a lot of rationale. My point is, there's a lot of rationale to say people are generally interested. There's still general curiosity about this asset class. Being able to articulate it in a way that makes it easier is great. However, that said, I wish there wasn't. I wish there was a much cheaper, easier, less I got to go get a brokerage account because it's not for everyone, you know.
Completely.
So
Completely.
that's-
And this is where again we end up with the kind of like the trade-off between what the difference currently is, that the perceived security, regulatory support comes at a cost, and the cost is you pay a fee. And likewise, the whole thing about, well, is it easier to have a bank account or easier to have a crypto wallet where you look after keys? Well, my experience actually in trying to open a UK bank account, the crypto wallet's easier these days. And everyone's saying, oh, the problem with crypto is it's too hard. The people who are saying it's too hard haven't tried opening a bank account for a while. Because if you try and open a bank account these days, you'll discover that there's all sorts of hoops you go through on that. Sorry, Josh, you were just smiling on that.
Well, it's not just opening a bank account. It's opening a bank account if, say, you're a woman in Afghanistan. Like, what other option do you have than, say, a crypto account if you actually want to hold long-term wealth? So it does bring some more equity globally.
That's a fair call on that. So, sorry, I'm conscious we've only got about 10 minutes left, and we've been delving into this space quite deeply. I don't know if anyone's got anything else they'd like to talk about, or anything they'd like to share or ask questions about, for that matter.
Can I add a slightly different vector of our conversation, which is on this transition from this topic? So I got some friends in Japan. My wife's Japanese, so I've lived there a long time, and they run one of the crypto exchanges. And so we were chatting to them, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're working with one of the large Japanese banks, and we're going to pitch to Sony. We're going to pitch a wallet infrastructure to Sony to hold their NFTs, which other artifacts, the skins and the achievements and all these kinds of things." And so I pondered for a second, and I looked at it and I went, "So you're making a crypto play then?" He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, you basically pitch the back end, the blockchain, you get all of the artifacts, you get all of the Sony PlayStation stuff. And then when you've done the job and they're happy, you then go, I don't suppose you could just put a button on your Sony PlayStation environment that says buy crypto." And he looked at me and kind of this sort of cheeky kind of grin. But this is my point broadly is to get people into an ecosystem that they trust, in a technology that they're familiar with, in something which isn't risky, a skin of a game, an achievement in a game, something like that. And then you can easily then articulate them on, different use cases with different assets. I think that's a smart move. Whether maybe gaming's the vector through which Bitcoin goes global.
So it's interesting you should mention that, because we were actually talking about this a few weeks ago. So Sonium, which is part of Sony's solution, is exactly this. It's effectively a platform. I think when we were discussing the other week, we discovered that it sits actually on top of Ethereum, I think originally. But yeah, exactly as you say, that when you start looking at the ability for a traditional electronics firm to allow a gateway into the crypto world, whether that be through NFTs or whatever, and they're linking this in with the metaverse capabilities, this is where you suddenly end up with a fascinating intersection of all of these things coming together, of like traditional technology company, metaverse, NFTs, crypto, all of it kind of like coming together. I find that fascinating.
I think what the industry needs is a killer product, because I don't think the general person on the street really cares about the underlying technology. It's like if you're using Facebook, I don't know, I think they now use React or something, and they were running the LAMP stack before, but the users, they didn't know that, and they don't care. They had a product that they loved. And I think in the industry, we spend too much time, especially because I spend a lot of time with developers, and we speak so much about the product, but we tend not to speak about the end user. And that's, I think, as an industry, that's a weakness that we all have.
I think you're spot on there. I am, however, going to argue against one thing, though, that having been in IT for approaching 40 years, and we always talk about the killer app or whatever, the thing that is going to make a massive, massive difference. I don't think it actually works that way. I think what you need are solutions that are just slightly different. and are more incremental in nature. And I think they're just incremental and then they grow and grow. I keep saying that the one thing that may end up being a killer app, well, it's not really an app, it's a platform, is X. So X, formerly known as Twitter, is developing itself to be more than just the ability to send 140 characters of insults to each other, and is now an information platform. It's a video streaming platform. It's a commentary platform. It's got micropayments built into it. And what you're seeing is an incremental growth in its capabilities, where it's not a killer app, as in it's launched on day one and it's the most amazing thing, but it just gently keeps adding more and more things. And I think that might be the thing with blockchain and crypto, that it's just making these incremental things that will grow. But that's my perspective.
So I would argue that in terms of a currency, you don't want a killer app. Your killer app is the use of it. In terms of having other, say, microservices or things like Ethereum, where it's performing all these different things, then I would agree that having, say, something like Twitter X, it does make a lot of sense, and where you're distributing more work across, or workloads across a global population. But in terms of pure strict finance, like you actually just want that to be simple and robust and for people to adopt it, which is quite a bit different than a killer app. It's more a mentality and cultural change, which takes a while.
Yeah.
But to follow the point, this is why the Sony strategy is so interesting, because you can see, there's the Web3 element to it, but they've just bought, didn't they buy the FTX entity in Japan? My friend missed his pitch, and others pitched didn't win. They decided just to go buy an exchange, and they would get custody and they would get the blockchain interoperability there. The strategy. I would see. So I agree, Josh. I think the people like, there's Sony, there's Amazon, there's not Alipay, there's the Chinese e-commerce site Rakuten in Japan.
WeChat is the one that I think.
WeChat, there you go.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think they're all sleeping giants, slowly starting to wake up to kind of the fact that what do they have, which is the key thing: hundreds of millions of users who interact with the platform every single day, on nothing to do with crypto, but meaningfully, I'm buying something, or I'm playing a game, or I'm messaging someone. That's, I think, is the key to making it win, right? So your point's well made, I think, Josh.
Well, if that's it, then that's probably a really good point to close off, where everyone's happy and we're all agreeing on things. That's always a good sign. So a rare thing. I'm always happy when we disagree, though, because that's a far better way of coming up with different perspectives. And the thing I love about these kind of sessions is getting a wide variety of views on that, which is really, really good. So as we're heading towards on the hour anyway, I like to close these sessions off. We'll close it off there while we're all happy and we're getting on with everybody and we're not arguing and complaining. So I'll close it by saying thank you very much to everyone for coming along today. It's been really interesting. Josh, great to hear some great insights, particularly about the Far East and that kind of thing. Arnold, always good to have you on board. Do keep sticking around, and again, a different perspective. And Ken and Josh, nice to see you joining us. Do come again. And the stalwarts as well, finally, Elena and Gabriella, who stay quiet but sometimes come up with some of the really great comments as well. So thanks everyone for joining. For those who are interested, come and join us next week. See you around, folks. Bye for now.